I was just curious to what y'all thought, of any of the natural theological arguments. Are there any specific ones that y'all think are more likely or more reasonable than other ones?
Sure, there are some that will seem more reasonable than others, but when you talk about whether or not any of them are both valid and sound, no.
Oh, you don't think any of them are?
Well, no. If I did, I would be a theist.
Well, I mean reasonable in the sense that you don't have to necessarily jump on board, but it could make it.
That's not reasonable. That's not the way syllogisms work.
Yeah.
Well, no, syllogisms, in of themselves, because then it would be logically necessary. Yeah.
I think I know what you're asking, Don. And what I'll say is that I can respect the fact that apologists who are in the habit of employing these logical proofs do at least recognize that the whole faith thing that we just talked about with the previous caller isn't necessarily good enough, and that there is a real need to take an intellectual approach to defending Christianity. And I can at least respect that activity. Yeah, I mean, I respect that they understand that, and they really are trying to, exercise their minds in their defense of the faith. So, if that's what you're asking, yeah, I mean, I do acknowledge that that's what they're doing.
Yeah, it's nice that there's an effort made as opposed to just saying, well, you just kind of got to take it on faith, or it's a personal, for God has personally revealed himself to me. Well, that's great, but, it doesn't do anybody else any good.
Mm-hmm.
Right, argument from religious experience. Well, I mean, what faults? I mean, I know good old William Lane Craig. I know he can be a jerk sometimes, but he's the foremost defender of the Kalam cosmological argument. I mean, what do y'all think of that?
It's
we've talked about it so many times.
It's slightly better than Pascal's wager. I'll give it credit for being difficult to address because the concepts are often beyond what people are familiar with without actually spending time digging into this stuff. Apart from that, I mean, I think it was you and Russell, didn't you guys do a whole episode on Kalam?
Was it that, or did we talk about it when we were taping that one time at your place because the studio was closed?
I don't know. We've addressed it.
But we've done it. Yeah, we've done it once.
And there's a response up on
about Kalam before. Yeah.
And there's a response, or I didn't write all of it, or actually any of it probably. There's a response on the Iron Chariots wiki about Kalam as well.
Yeah, page there. And
I don't find it very impressive.
Well,
at all.
what Kalam tries to do, right, is it tries to get against the whole infinite regress problem of just the basic first cause argument by essentially switching the wording of its premise around to talk about anything that begins to exist must have a cause, and in phrasing it this way, Kalam then simply by fiat categorizes God as a thing that didn't begin to exist. But the problem right there is, well, how do you, where does that, the confidence in that assertion come from, right? I mean, you could say God is not a thing that began to exist, but why should I simply assume that as a premise right off the bat? So I think it fails in the same way that a lot of the logical proofs for God fail, like Tag and some of the others, in that it doesn't support its own premises very well. And in fact, I think it's guilty of begging the question, which is where, the conclusion, what it seeks to prove is essentially stated in the premise. And that's a logical fallacy.
It's a little bit of a cheat to... The old cosmological arguments were easily defeated by then where did God come from? Mm-hmm. And so the reforming of this to be that which begins to exist as a cause, and therefore there must be something that didn't begin to exist, and we're going to call that God. Great. Well, even if Kalam is true, which is not, but even if it was, the most you could get out of it is that there's something. You can't get to any characteristics of it other than something eternal as a prime mover thing. You can't tell whether it's intelligent, whether it even still exists, etc. And because the models that attempt to build off of this go back to kind of a call we had from last week where there's this something outside of space and time, well, we have no demonstration that any such thing is possible. And moreover, there are models of the universe in which we can say, yes, the universe, as we understand it, had a beginning. But that doesn't mean, we've got the idea of time beginning with the beginning of the universe as well. So saying before the Big Bang just doesn't make any sense. There was no before.
Which is a very hard concept for people to wrap their heads around, right? Because we think of things in terms of our own experience of things. It's hard to imagine a period of no time. Right?
Lawrence Krauss has a really good talk that he gave, I think, at like the 2009 AAI on a universe from nothing. These also fall into the category of I don't understand them well enough to actually vouch for them, or say what my confidence level is. But I can say that I experience some existence, and even absent a good explanation for its origins, doesn't mean I should start accepting bad explanations for its origins. No matter how convincing an argument seems, at the end of the day, there needs to be evidence backing it up. And I actually don't find that argument that convincing because I can conceive of a model of a universe that has always existed, and what we identify now, as far as always has any meaning, and what we identify as universe right now is simply the current transitional state of this universe.
Yeah.
That at the point of the Big Bang, something which had always existed became the time-space continuum in which we reside.
Yeah, the only thing that the Big Bang Theory describes, and this is a point a lot of people miss, and although if I'm wildly wrong, I expect our resident physicist in the studio audience to throw a chair at me in about a second and a half. But I think that what the Big Bang Theory describes, you could say, is it's just the event that caused the universe to expand into its present form. Right? It's not necessarily a creation ex nihilo thing. It doesn't necessarily say, and before that there was nothing at all whatsoever. Right? It describes an expansion event.
Right.
I mean, think about it. If something had to go bang in the Big Bang, right? I mean, but we can't really say anything definite. And the problem that I have with, just to mention one more difficulty that logical proofs for God have, is that at the end of the day, even if you have one of these that is bulletproof in its construction, right? And you can construct a logical argument that is faultless and still false, right?
Well, no.
Well, all dogs die. George Washington is dead. George Washington was a dog. It's wrong.
Well, that doesn't.
But
that
you
means
can't.
It's not faultless.
But I mean, but in terms of the logical structure of it, right?
Well, there's a difference between validity and soundness.
That's what I mean.
Validity goes to structure, and soundness goes to content.
But it's like even once you've still got this proof, it's like, well, how do you say that what you've just described in this logical proof still maps to anything in reality, right? Because you can come up with that's the tag argument when you had that big episode with Matt Slick, and I wish I'd sort of been there to just be able to talk to Matt Slick for a bit and say, look, I just replaced the word God in your conclusion with flying spaghetti monster, and we have exactly the same proof, right? So, well, at the end of the day, I mean, can you really say that? Okay, you have this really, really great logical proof, but are you still describing something that actually exists with this proof, or is this just an intellectual exercise? That's another problem that I have. So.
Well, y'all brought up a lot of objections. I'm trying to decide who to respond here.
Babble.
That was well, I will say though that you I forget which one of y'all brought it up, but that if even if the Kalam is successful, and I quote you, it's not. But even if it was, we wouldn't know the properties of the first cause or whatever it is. And if the argument's unsuccessful, obviously we wouldn't. But in the more recent variations of the Kalam, we would know something like changelessness, timelessness, like it's a timeless being, in immaterial.
I don't know how you got changelessness. Which has absolutely nothing to do with the Kalam cosmological argument.
Well, it does, if you want me to explain it.
Oh, please, because this is a first. Changelessness.
Well, if it goes, obviously the argument's from infinite regress. We can't have an infinite regress, and then so therefore we must have
That's
the
not
first
Kalam.
cause. Huh?
That's not Kalam.
No, that's...
Well, I know what the kalam is. Whatever begins to exist has a cause.
Sure.
The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. But I'm saying...
How do you get from that argument to, therefore, this cause is changeless?
Oh, all right. If you give into the three premises and you agree with the conclusion, then you can analyze what kind of being, deity, whatever you want to call it, that the first cause is, or whatever caused the universe. Or immaterial, the being immaterial and changeless.
How did you get to it being a being?
Well, I think it has to be conscious because...
How did you get to... Why would you think it has to be conscious?
Yeah, see,
I was about to try and explain.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, it's honestly been a while since I've looked at the argument, but if I remember correctly, a being can't, and there's only two things that can bring about how does it go? I remember reading...
Here it is right here. I've got it right here, okay? So two premises. Everything that has a beginning of its existence has a cause of its existence. The universe has a beginning of its existence. Therefore, the universe has a cause of its existence. If the universe has a cause of its existence, then that cause is God. Therefore, God exists. That's the classical argument, okay? Now, what Kalam does is that Craig modified it to this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause.
Right.
The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And the cause is the God of classical theism and is a personal being because he chose to create the universe. Now, how he goes from 1, 2, and 3 to 4 is where the argument happens, right?
Right.
I'm still wondering how you got to consciousness.
Well, I'm wondering how Craig gets to...
I think I vaguely remember we sort of got in a little bit deeper than I was hoping. I was hoping for a general discussion of the arguments, but
but you called in about Kalam, and now you're saying you haven't looked at it a while and didn't know you were going to get into a deep discussion about it. Here's a good idea: go study it and call back another time.
Well, I think if you go back, I didn't specifically say let's argue the Kalam. I said what do you think about it?
Sure.
But what I would say about the consciousness aspect is that if I remember correctly, he said that a non-conscious being can't bring about, and something infinite has to bring about a non-infinite universe.
Let me
go ahead.
Let me pause for a second because you start with, if I remember correctly, he said. Well, whether or not you remember correctly is one thing, but why do I care what he said? But then
because that's the argument.
I don't care what he said. I mean, you're citing this as if
I'm
there's...
telling you the argument. If he wrote the argument, then that's what he said.
Okay, no, you're trying to construct it from memory, and Martin just read it. But anyway, that doesn't make any difference. You just said that non-conscious beings can't.
Wait.
Now, hang on. The words that you said were non-conscious beings can't. And first of all, that makes no sense. It's got the same type of assumption in there. It's assuming that we're only talking about beings and limiting it to there and then saying, oh, non-conscious beings can't do this kind of action, so it must have been a conscious being.
Okay. First of all, you were saying about memory. Why should I, you need to brush it up and you can't bring it up if it's just from memory and you don't know for sure. He was just talking about Spinoza. I think it was Spinoza that said that. That's from memory. It's from another person. It can still be legitimate, even though he might not know it word for word. The concept's still the same.
No, I'm not challenging whether or not people should be able to say things from memory. I'm challenging whether or not you are reliably and accurately relaying the information that you're trying to remember after admitting that it's been a while. And since I've spent a lot of time on this argument, and one of the biggest objections is how do you get from X, there must have a first cause, to this first cause is a conscious being, and have found nothing along those lines, I'm just asking you how you get there. And if your response is, well, if I remember right, he said, that's not an argument, that's just an appeal to what somebody else said.
It would be an argument from authority if I said, because he said it, it's correct. But that's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that if I remember correctly, if I remember correctly, all dogs die, blah, blah, blah. Just even if I'm inaccurate with my memory, if the concept's still legitimate.
Okay, I think we're getting into like...
If you're inaccurate, then it's pointless to continue, is my point.
If my memory is inaccurate but the argument's still legitimate, why would you even care?
Because if the argument is legitimate and you relay an entirely different argument, then we wasted a bunch of time. What's the point in debating an argument or discussing an argument that isn't the actual argument?
So you're saying if I added to the argument myself and I improved the Kalam cosmological argument right here, but it's not the original Kalam cosmological argument that I was trying to relay, then you would say it's pointless.
No, that's not even close to remotely what I'm saying. I've asked you to present a valid argument for how you get to consciousness, and you haven't even come close to attempting that. All you've done is tried to remember how somebody else might have done it, and you haven't gotten that accurate. Present whatever argument you want for how you get from first cause to consciousness. But present it as an argument.
Okay, well, if we're on the same page there, then I have no problem with that. I guess we got a little bit confused there when you brought up me inaccurately remembering something. I think that's somewhat irrelevant.
The only argument that you're presenting, if you had just presented an argument, I don't care where it comes from. It doesn't impress me anymore that an argument comes from William Lane Craig or a dog. Well, all right, if it came from a dog, that would actually be fairly impressive. But it doesn't make any difference. I don't judge the validity or soundness of an argument based on the person who's relaying it. What I'm saying is present what is the justification for getting to consciousness. And in answer to that, instead of presenting an argument, the best you could do is say, well, if I remember right, he said something like, that gets us nowhere.
Well, yeah, no, I think I agree in general. It's just general conjecture. I wasn't trying to absolutely prove it. I'm just throwing out an idea for how we could get to first consciousness, and then
what's the idea?
From there.
What's the idea? Because we got 10 minutes left. So what's the idea for how to get to the first cause must be conscious?
Okay,
because I don't see the link in Craig's argument. I don't see where he gets from his premises to this must be not only a God, not only a thinking, intelligent being, but it has to be this specific God, this specific thinking, intelligent being.
I'm just going to let him just give me anything
I'll
about
go
consciousness.
I'll go ahead and give my last shot at it. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Therefore, the universe began to exist. And the universe is not infinite. It's finite. And a finite thing can't bring about another finite thing without there being an infinite regress of causes. And so an infinite thing would have to bring about a finite thing. And in order to do that, an infinite thing, the infinite being, whatever it is, would have to be conscious. Otherwise, the thing that it created would also be infinite.
Wow. Yeah, I tell you what, I'm sure this clip will end up on YouTube. And when it does, transcribe it and write that down.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm not saying that's legitimate. I'm just telling you. That's how I remember. You asked for it. I'm just telling you.
First of all, at best you got to an infinite thing. You didn't demonstrate that there was any necessity of consciousness for this infinite thing. And you threw the word being in there again, although that hasn't been justified either. That's my point.
Well, I think if it is conscious, then it would be, a being.
Well, yes, I agree. If it's conscious, it's a being. And you haven't offered a justification for it being a being or for it being conscious. At best, even if I accepted your entire argument, you only got to infinite. Not being and not conscious.
Okay, that's fine with me. I have no problem with that. I called in for a discussion about natural theological arguments, and here we are.
You have no problem with...
Great.
Okay.
All right.
Cool. Catch you later, Don. Thanks.
Thanks for the call, Don.
All right.
Let's see.